Hello and welcome to Scholastically Natalie. I am going to attempt to, at the very least, record this video. I don't know if this is the one that will make it out to publishing, because I did just have a giant coughing attack a couple hours ago, and thus my throat is still not exactly pleased with me. So if there's excessive coughing, I'm probably gonna just scrap this. So apologies in advance. Today's episode is brought to you by Mountain Dew, in the hopes that my throat will stop trying to kill me after eating a sandwich. Also by Powerade Zero, because while that does make my throat kind of, not like me, it does in fact make my legs stop cramping, so we're just mixing the best of both worlds. Sorry, that's probably, again, way too much personal information. But I have been trying some wafers from Myers, like the tasty crunchy kind, and those have been delicious. But also I will never buy any more because I don't eat a lot of them, because eventually my mouth is like, this is too much sweetness, but I don't need them in my house. Okay, so we are today reading the introduction for Kill All the Normies by Angela Nagle. Its subtitle is Online Culture Wars from 4chan and Tumblr to Trump and the Alt-Right. Before we get into this, just blanket statement. One, this book is pretty academically worded, which is fun for me, but if you're not into, like, really super long sentences with analytical purposes, this is probably not the book for you. Feel free to listen, but, like, if you have a hard time reading, like, super long words and stuff, this is not going to be your friend. Number two, yes, this is kind of a political topic. So far from the introduction, I can, surmise that this is a relatively neutral stance, probably more left-leaning than right-leaning, but at the same time, if there is any politics discussion in my my comments, I expect you to remain polite, and non-aggressive, and non-insulting. I will delete comments that cross that line. I am a very middling human, and I don't really want to get involved into it, but this is also a fascinating subject to me. So we're just going to read books on it together, and maybe I'll give my opinion, but maybe I won't. We'll see. This was a book that was recommended by Charlie the X during their extremely long but absolutely stunning and beautiful video essay on Bo Burnham and Jeff Bezos. 10 out of 10 recommend. We'll try to remember to link it in the description box. So, I keep calling him Charlie the X, CJ the X. I even pulled up his Twitter to look at it. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. He hasn't made any other video essays that are quite as stunning and enthralling as his Bo Burnham versus Jeff Bezos, because that has just captured my soul for like the past 3 weeks. But he has other vastly interesting essays, such as why you shouldn't watch the first 5 minutes of Tangled, and also that he argues that No Face from Spirited Away is an incel. I haven't watched that one yet, because I kind of like No Face and I don't want that to be ruined. Anyways, we're starting with the intro, which is called From Hope to Harambe. In the lead-up to the election of Barack Obama in 2008, his message of hope was publicly and with great earnestness shared by vast numbers of liberals online, eager to show their love for the first black president, ecstatic to be part of what felt like a positive mass cultural movement. After George W. Bush, who'd waged wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and embarrassed educated people with his southern style and his regular gaffes and grammatical mistakes or Bushisms, the feeling of shame among U.S. liberals was captured at the time by books like Michael Moore's Stupid White Men. In stark contrast, Obama was articulate, sophisticated, erudite, and cosmopolitan. In the media spectacle of his election, Oprah cried, Beyoncé sang, and crowds of young, adoring fans rejoiced. Even some of the icy hearts of those significantly to the left of the Democratic Party were temporarily melted in what felt like a mass outpouring of positivity and hope, an egalitarian dream realized. Hillary Clinton tried to repeat this formula in 2016 by dancing on the Ellen DeGeneres show, drafting in Beyoncé once again, assuring listeners of her penchant for hot sauce, and attracting feminist celebrities like Lena Dunham with the I'm with her slogan. However, instead, she became a source of comedy and ridicule among large online audiences from right across the political spectrum. When she solemnly condemned a new internet age right wing movement as part of Trump's basket of deplorables, the massed online ranks of the target of her comments collectively erupted in memes, mockery, and celebration. How did we get from those earnest, hopeful days broadcast across the media mainstream to where we are now? This book covers this period from the perspective of internet culture and subcultures, tracing the online culture wars that have raged on below the line and below the radar of mainstream media throughout the period over feminism, sexuality, gender identity, racism, free speech, and political correctness. This was unlike the culture wars of the 60s or the 90s, in which a typically older age cohort of moral and cultural conservatives fought against a tide of cultural secularization and liberalism among the young. This online backlash was able to mobilize a strange vanguard of teenage gamers, pseudonymous swastika-posting anime lovers, ironic South Park conservatives, anti-feminist pranksters, nerdish harassers, and meme-making trolls whose dark humor and love of transgression for its own sake made it hard to know what political views were genuinely held and what were merely, as they used to say, for the lulz. What seemed to hold them all together in their obscurity was a love of mocking the earnestness and moral self-flattery of what felt like a tired liberal intellectual conformity, running right through from establishment liberal politics to the more militant enforcers of new sensitivities, from the wackiest corners of Tumblr to campus politics. Through this period, we can also see the death of what remained of a mass culture sensibility, in which there was still a mainstream media arena and a mainstream sense of culture in the public. The triumph of the Trumpians was also a win in the war against this mainstream media, which is now held in contempt by many average voters and the weird irony-laden internet subcultures from right and left who equally set themselves apart from this hated mainstream. It is a career disaster now to signal your left-behind cluelessness as a basic bitch, a normie, or a member of the corrupt media mainstream in any way. Instead, we see online the emergence of a new kind of anti-establishment sensibility expressing itself in the kind of DIY culture of memes and user-generated content that cyber-utopian true believers have evangelized about for many years, but had not imagined taking on this particular political form. Compare the first election, won by Obama, in which social media devotees reproduced the iconic but official blue and red stylized stencil portrait of the new president with hope printed across the bottom, a portrait created by artist Shepard Fairey and approved by the official Obama campaign, to the bursting forth of irreverent mainstream baffling meme culture during the last race, in which the Bernie Sanders dank meme stash Facebook page and the Donald subreddit defined the tone of the race for a young and newly politicized generation, with the mainstream media desperately trying to catch up with a subcultural in-style joke to suit two emergent anti-establishment waves of the right and left. Writers like Manuel Castells and numerous commentators in the Wired magazine milieu told us of the coming of a networked society, in which old hierarchical models of business and culture would be replaced by the wisdom of crowds, the swarm, the hive mind, citizen journalism, and user-generated content. They got their wish, but it's not quite the utopian vision they were hoping for. And I'm going to pause for a side note here, because it's vastly interesting, because as in most stories, we're constantly warned of the dangers of mob mentality and a hive mind, but we're also becoming more akin to those things, but only because of the internet. And it is also interesting to see citizen journalism, because in some cases it is less biased than actual journalism, because of how news outlets allow their reporters to function. And then we also see citizen journalists that people have grown to trust because they're not employed by large mainstream media companies, also having perhaps even worse biases or showing them in larger ways. And it's a fascinating topic because everything has its flaws. As old media dies, gatekeepers of cultural sensibilities and etiquette have been overthrown. Notions of popular taste maintained by a small creative class are now perpetually outpaced by viral online content from obscure sources, and culture industry consumers have been replaced by constantly online, instant content producers. And this is even more true now. I mean, looking at viral TikToks and trends and how quickly those trends die out. I mean, I can remember shopping in like TJ Maxx and Marshalls and Gabe's, and there's just tons of these TikTok trends that have obviously not sold well because people had bought them too late or they're just leftover stock, but it was just tons and tons and tons of these products that have been left in the wayside because of how quickly these fads burst into being and then die. The year 2016 may be remembered as the year the media mainstream's hold over formal politics died. 1,000 Trump Pepe memes bloomed, and a strongman larger-than-life Twitter troll who showed open hostility to the mainstream media and to both party establishments took the White House without them. Which also is interesting because it really did make him into such an underdog story for people who were rooting for him because nobody wanted him there. And, like, that's such an underdog story that everybody in America grows up with, and it really only lent further credence to, like, all the people who supported him because it became, like, being on the right side of history almost, which was very interesting. One of the early significant moments of rupture in mainstream internet culture sensibilities was the viral Kony 2012 video. You can map a trajectory through the dominant styles from virtue to cynical, inscrutable irony, roughly from Kony 2012 to the Harambe meme explosion in 2016. The Kony 2012 film's purpose was to promote the charity campaign Stop Kony, which itself aimed to have the Ugandan militia leader Joseph Kony arrested by the end of 2012. The film received over 100 million views and went so viral that one poll suggested half of the young adult Americans heard about it in the days following the video's release, causing its website to crash. Time magazine called it the most viral video ever made. On Facebook and Twitter, a vast audience of Western young people normally pretty indifferent to the activities of Ugandan war criminals shared the video, with urgent emotional exclamations attached, which we might now cynically call virtue signaling. But then the video and the campaign started to come under criticism from Ugandans, experts on the region, and even their head of state. Denunciations of the video began to pour in for its crass oversimplification, inaccuracy, emotional manipulation, and slacktivism, a now common pejorative also called clicktivism. A mass screening of the film in Uganda was met with jeering and hostility as viewers were angered that the time was focused on the U.S. filmmaker while neglecting Kony's victims. Western critics, eager for shares of righteous approval, rushed to expose the insufficient virtue of Kony 2012 and its mainstream supporters. Then, still at the height of the video's viral fame, Jason Russell, the filmmaker, was arrested and detained for psychiatric evaluation after his public breakdown was filmed and released online. This became yet another viral video in which he could be seen outdoors naked and shouting, hitting the ground, masturbating, and vandalizing cars. At a dizzying pace, the Kony story had run a now familiar course, from mainstream virtue to competitive virtue hot takes, to disgrace to schadenfreude, which would become a standard plot of dark online spectacles in the years that followed. Many of those who had shared the video in the spirit of global goodwill were sheepishly taking it down. We're pausing for a drink. I do love Mountain Dew. Earnest, feel-good, easily shared concern had been replaced in a matter of days with the darkest side of the return of a more native, pre-monetized, anonymous internet culture. Schadenfreude, deep cynicism, and the now unstoppable force of public humiliation as viral entertainment. By 2016, after countless repeats of the Kony 2012 cycle from virtue to disgrace, a spirit of deep nihilistic cynicism and reactive irony bubbled up to the surface of mainstream internet culture, and an absurd, in-jokey form humor became dominant. When a gorilla named Harambe was shot dead at the Cincinnati Zoo that year after a child fell into his enclosure, the usual cycles of public displays of outrage online began as expected with inevitable competitive virtue signaling. At first, emotional and outraged people online blamed the child's parents for the gorilla's death, with some even petitioning to have the parents prosecuted for their neglect. But then a kind of giddy, ironic mocking of the social media spectacle started to take over. The Harambe meme soon became the perfect parody of the sentimentality and absurd priorities of Western liberal performative politics and the online mass hysteria that often characterized it. On the same day that a post about the incident reached the front page of Reddit News, a petition titled Justice for Harambe was created on Change.org, which called for authorities to hold the child's parents responsible for Harambe's death, gaining hundreds of thousands of signatures. Soon, the mostly ironically used hashtags, hashtag Justice for Harambe and hashtag RIP Harambe, began circulating. Song parodies with Harambe inserted into the lyrics were created, and the call to arms "Dicks Out for Harambe" was quickly turned into a popular expression by comedian Brandon Wardell. And the funny part about this one is, I do legitimately remember some Redditors in my high school during this time just having Harambe profile pictures and at school dances yelling like "Dicks Out for Harambe," and like I didn't understand it because I wasn't on Reddit at the time, and it was a very strange thing to witness. Harambe began appearing in tongue-in-cheek sentimental portraits of beloved celebrities who had died in 2016, like David Bowie and Prince. One U.S. high school student in a gorilla costume was filmed running along the sidelines at his school's first football game of the season, dragging another student behind him like the little boy in the enclosure before Harambe was shot. The zoo pleaded with the meme makers to stop using Harambe hashtags and bombarding them with tweets and messages. The meme spread to mainstream media when a young man holding a Bush did Harambe sign, a reference also to the 9/11 Truther conspiracy, appeared on MSNBC Live outside the Democratic National Convention. Matt Chrisman from the podcast Chapo Trap House, itself a knowing product of contemporary irony-saturated online culture, unsentimentally but accurately summed up, saying, "The popularity of Harambe jokes proves that people want to laugh about murder but feel bad about it." Chrisman also noted on one podcast that Harambe mania really took off after the Orlando nightclub massacre in a gay club, carried out by a shooter pledging allegiance to ISIS. Responding to highly mediated tragedies with insensitive pranking and irony had been a staple of online trolling cultures for many years before, but Harambe was the first case attracting such large numbers of people online wanting to get in on the in-joke. It went viral, too, because it hit at a time when a particular style of humorless, self-righteous, right-on social media sentimentality had already reached such an absurd peak that the once obscure style of ironic, cynical mockery also emerged into more mainstream internet culture as a counterforce. Although it worked as a brilliantly absurd parody and was embraced by ironists from left to right, what came to complicate the detached humor is that, as in so many other similar cases, it allowed cover for genuinely sinister things to hide amid the maze of irony. For example, Harambe was referenced by harassers in the hate campaign led against Ghostbusters star Leslie Jones, with largely anonymous threats and comparisons of her to the gorilla. This barrage of abuse came her way after Milo Yiannopoulos, I hope I said that right, the English gay conservative turned alt-right celebrity, tweeted a series of insults at her and said, among other things, that she looked like a black dude. And this is a weird insult because I'd never seen it before reading this, but then I saw that in TikToks on some very nice-looking ladies' videos as well. It was very strange. The harassment campaign against her for finding herself in Milo's firing line led to, among other things, her website being hacked and nude photos of her being circulated online. Given the Harambe meme became a favorite of alt-right abusers, was it then just old-fashioned racism dressed up as internet-savvy satire as it appealed most to those seeking to mock liberal sensitivities? Or was it a clever parody of the inane hysteria and faux politics of liberal internet culture? Did those involved in such memes any longer know what motivated them and if they themselves are being ironic or not? Is it possible that they are both ironic parodists and earnest actors in a media phenomenon at the same time? A hacker who goes by the Twitter handle @Prong hacked into the account of Cincinnati Zoo director Thane Maynard, retweeting hashtag dicks out for Harambe from his account. When asked about his motivations, though, he told New York Daily News he was not sure why he hacked in Maynard's account, saying, "At the time when it actually happened, I was kinda angry at the dude who shot him." It was amid this ironical, in-jokey maze of meaning that the online culture wars played out, that Trump got elected and what we now call the alt-right came to prominence. Every bizarre event, new identity, and strange subcultural behavior that baffles general audiences when they eventually make the mainstream media, from otherkin to far-right Pepe memes, can be understood as a response to a response to a response, each one responding angrily to the existence of the other. Trumpian meme makers ramped up their taboo-breaking anti-PC style in response to gender-bending Tumblr users, who themselves then became more sensitive, more convinced of the racism, misogyny, and heteronormative oppression of the world outside of their online subcultures. At the same time, the deplorables, from the Trumpian trolls to the alt-right, view the Hillary loyalists, the entrenched identity politics of Tumblr, and the intersectional anti-free speech campus left as evidence of their equally bleak view of a rapidly declining Western civilization, as both sides have become increasingly unmoored to any cultural mainstream, which scarcely resembles either bleak vision. Sorry, we need another drink break. The once obscure call-out culture of the left, emanating from Tumblr-style campus-based identity politics, reached its peak during this period, in which everything from eating noodles to reading Shakespeare was declared problematic, and even the most mundane acts misogynist and white supremacist. While taboo and anti-moral ideologies festered in the dark corners of the anonymous internet, the de-anonymized social media platforms where most young people now develop their political ideas for the first time, became a panopticon in which the many lived in fear of observation from the eagle eye of an offended organizer of public shaming. At the height of its power, the dreaded call-out, no matter how minor the transgression or how well-intentioned the transgressor, could ruin your reputation, your job, or your life. The particular incarnations of the online left and right that exist today are undoubtedly a product of this strange period of ultra-puritanism. These obscure online political beginnings became formative for a whole generation and impacted mainstream sensibilities and even language, which is so interesting to me because I do see that and feel that, and it's so interesting to have part of a political ideology that calls itself liberal, meaning free, essentially, subscribing to Puritanism, which is often horrendously confining. It's just been very interesting to me, and thus why I'm reading this book. The hysterical liberal call-out produced a breeding ground for an online backlash of irreverent mockery and anti-PC, typified by charismatic figures like Milo. But after crying wolf throughout these years, calling everyone from saccharine pop stars to Justin Trudeau a white supremacist and everyone who wasn't with her a sexist, the real wolf eventually arrived, in the form of the openly white nationalist alt-right, who hid among an online army of ironic and jokey trolls. When this happened, nobody knew who to take literally anymore, including many of those in the middle of this new online far-right themselves. The alt-light. Here I have assumed that alt-light means those who pretend to subscribe to alt-right philosophy or who seem to be in the alt-right but not actually fully believe the ideals, something along those lines. The alt-right figures that became celebrities during this period made their careers exposing the absurdities of online identity politics and the culture of lightly thrown claims of misogyny, racism, ableism, fatphobia, transphobia, and so on. Side note, which is interesting because that was a few years ago that we had this enormous surge of what you would call the skeptic or the cynical community on YouTube, where people were constantly reacting to cringe compilations or liberals getting owned and stuff like that, which I thought was very interesting. However, offline, only one side saw their guy take the office of US President, and only one side has in their midst faux, ironic, sig hail saluting, open white segregationists, and genuinely hate filled, occasionally murderous, misogynists, and racists. And so, also here, I think is so interesting about how online versus offline those realities are constantly clashing. Before the overtly racist alt-right were widely known, the more mainstream alt-right largely flattered it, gave it glowing write-ups in Breitbart and elsewhere, had its spokespeople on their YouTube shows, and promoted it on social media. Nevertheless, when Milo's sudden career implosion happened later, they didn't return the favor, which I think may be setting a precedent for a future in which the playfully transgressive alt-right unwittingly play the useful idiots for those with much more serious political aims. If this dark, anti-Semitic, race segregationist ideology grows in the coming years, with their vision of the future that would necessitate violence, those who made the right attractive will have to take responsibility for having played their role. And I do think this is another fascinating point about how some people do genuinely agree with some ideologies with like the alt-right, but then they're like, yeah, but nobody actually believes that. None of them are serious, like they're just being ironic. And I think having that sort of mentality and not kind of accepting that there are people who will go to insane extremes for what they believe in, on both sides of the spectrum, certainly. That you truly can't trust people to have the same sort of moral boundaries that you yourself have, or lack thereof. This book is an attempt to map the online culture wars that formed the political sensibilities of a generation, to understand and to keep an account of the online battles that may otherwise be forgotten, but have nevertheless shaped culture and ideas in a profound way, from tiny, obscure subcultural beginnings to mainstream public and political life in recent years. It will place contemporary culture wars in some historical context, and attempt to untangle the real from the performance, the material from the abstract, and the ironic from the faux ironic, if such a thing is any longer possible. And that is the intro. I am super excited to read the rest of this book. The only issue is that I keep thinking I don't have time to read for some reason. I get distracted doing other things. And I think it's going to be beautifully written, and it is extremely short. Hold on, I can tell you how many pages it is, which is good, because that way more people will be inclined to actually read it, because a long, very academically written book, most people would not want to read. So it's 120 pages, which is great. It's a short novella. I'm really interested in seeing what more Angela Nagle, I think it's Nagle, has to say. I think so far she has presented a pretty middling approach to this. I appreciate the descriptions she uses for both sides. I think she raises so many interesting points even just in the intro. I love having this discussion of memes and how they shape reality, and how like speaking things into existence and talking about it more and more perpetuates ideologies and makes certain things seem reasonable even though they aren't. And all of that is just fascinating, and the way the human brain reacts to these sort of things is also fascinating. It's so interesting to me. I don't think I'm going to be doing chapter by chapter readings of this, mostly because I want people to go buy it, because that way maybe she'll write more. And also because I feel like we probably wouldn't enjoy me doing long academic driven readings. And because I do want to read this more quickly. Maybe we'll do chapter 1, but I think that will be it. And I will probably do a book review of it once I've finished, with some of my favorite quotes, which will be hard because you can tell that I already have a lot of quotes that I like just from the intro, because the way that this author words things is absolutely stunning. It makes my little Victorian language heart so happy. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you will enjoy the upcoming videos. Let me know if you enjoyed this brief reading. I'm happy to say that I've not been coughing a lot. I staved them off with some Mountain Dew. And I'm just quite excited. I had a nice weekend with my friend who came up to visit, in case you were wondering, and I hope I didn't read that too quickly for you, because I know that I can read and talk quite quickly when I am excited. Apologies for any stumblings or miswordings of things. My mouth was not especially cooperative today, mostly because I've been coughing a lot. And I desperately hope that you have a great rest of the week, a very successful week, even if that means just getting your dishes or your